Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take a rich stack of sources and really extract the core wisdom, helping you shortcut your way to being truly well-informed. And today we are immersing ourselves in something, well, intensely spiritual. It's an allegorical interpretation of some of the foundational stories of faith.
That's right.
We're looking at selections from Madame Guyon's commentary on Genesis, specifically chapters 17 and 18. And this is not a quick read. It's a profound roadmap for the inner life.
It really is, and I think it's important to set the stage right away. The source material we have today, it isn't concerned with historical timelines or, literal geography.
Right.
Guyon takes the narrative of Abraham and Sarah, and she translates their outward journey, their conversations, their physical trials. All of it becomes stages of the soul's relationship with God.
So it's a blueprint.
It's a spiritual blueprint, a guide to the internal mystical journey, which she actually calls the path of divine union.
It's like spiritual cartography, then. The actions of a patriarch from 4,000 years ago are actually code for your internal spiritual struggle happening right now.
Exactly. And our sources are laser-focused on one specific concept: abandonment, or death to self.
That's the engine.
That is the main engine driving this entire deep dive. If we can understand how she uses Abraham's life to define death to self, we basically unlock her entire system.
Okay, so that's our mission today. We're trying to understand how these, seemingly simple biblical narratives can become a shortcut for you, the listener, to grasp these highly complex spiritual principles.
Right. We're dissecting the process of total surrender. We're asking, what does it actually mean when these spiritual texts demand you become dead to self?
And how does normal human doubt or even, intense religious activity, how does that play into or maybe even get in the way of achieving this divine union?
And finally, what does perfect, unwavering faith actually look like in practice, in those intimate moments with the divine?
We've organized all this material around two major themes. First, we'll dig into the radical transformation of identity and the sealing of the covenant in Genesis 17. We're really focusing on the prerequisites for union.
And then we'll move into chapter 18 to explore the immediate and really stunning results of that transformation, these intimate encounters with God, and the incredible effective power of intercession that follows.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
The story kicks off in Genesis 17, verse 1. It's dramatic. Abram is 99 years old. He's lived almost a century.
An entire lifetime.
And then God appears to him and makes this powerful declaration: I am Almighty God, walk before me and be blameless. Or complete. This feels like the spiritual entry point, doesn't it? The first command of the covenant.
It is. And that call to completeness, to be blameless, it's the required response to recognizing God as the Almighty, as El Shaddai.
Right.
The source links these two concepts inextricably. I mean, seeing God revealed as the Almighty immediately sets the bar for the human response.
So how do you get there? How do you become complete?
Well, according to Guyon, this completion isn't achieved through just, following laws or even through heroic effort. It's all about an internal posture.
Okay.
She argues the method for becoming a complete person is singular. Your satisfaction must be found only in living before him to please him.
Only.
Only. If anything else is providing your primary satisfaction, your job, your relationships, even your own spiritual achievements, you're not yet complete in her view.
That is a radical call for a singular focus. It means your entire internal barometer has to shift from self-satisfaction to divine pleasure.
It does.
So what's the payoff for that kind of intense internal discipline?
The result is, well, it's staggering. The source says that God promises union and then fruitfulness. The sequence is vital.
Union first.
God first honors the person with divine union, and then he makes them fruitful. It completely reverses the way we typically think about spiritual production.
Yeah, the normal approach is I'll work hard, I'll produce good results, and then God will reward me with intimacy. But Guyon's reading says, no, forget the results. Achieve intimacy first through total surrender, and the results will flow naturally from him, not from your striving.
Exactly. And this ensures that the fruit that's produced is truly God's work, flowing from the union itself, not from human effort. The union confirms your completion, and then the fruitfulness that follows confirms the authenticity of that union.
So what happens right after this revelation? Abram's physical reaction is immediate. He falls on his face. Verse 3.
And this physical gesture is the critical allegorical moment. It initiates the mystical state. Abram falls on his face, which the source interprets as a symbol.
A symbol of what?
It symbolizes that the person is instantly taught not to crave signs, not to look for external affirmations or even internal feelings of reward. Instead, the only thing the soul is now concerned with is being extinguished.
Wow.
This is the foundational posture of death to self.
Becoming nothing. The source uses that powerful phrase, becoming nothing. That sounds incredibly difficult for an ego-driven person like, well, most of us.
It is.
So what's the mechanism of this extinction? How does it actually work?
The mechanism is a total surrender of all self-reliance, all self-will, and all self-expectation. The crucial insight for the seeker is this. The most suitable state for serving God's transcendent plan is this death to self.
And why is that?
Because the true preparation needed to receive the supernatural is to become nothing. If you approach God with a self-full cupful of your own efforts, your strategies, your merits, there's simply no space for the divine to pour in its pure power. The self has to vacate the premises.
But wait, if the human mind is trained to look for confirmation, for signs, for that feeling of God's presence, how do you actively choose to not crave signs? Doesn't that go completely against the instinct for spiritual certainty?
It's the ultimate act of pure faith. And that's why Guyon's path is often called mystical or even controversial. It demands you surrender the intellectual need for proof.
So by falling on his face, Abram is basically saying, what?
He's saying, I accept the divine authority completely, and my only desire now is that my selfhood, my capacity to operate independently of you, is extinguished. The person stops seeking reassurance from God and only seeks to please God.
And the reward for that radical extinction is immense. The text says that after this mysterious death, God communicates himself in a radically different way.
Yes, imparting the greatest and most complete knowledge a person can obtain under his divine authority.
That's the moment of deep union.
It is. When the resistance of the self is finally gone, God can now truly traffic or communicate himself, his life, his character, his power without any impedance. This profound knowledge isn't intellectual data.
Right.
It's an experiential knowledge of God as the self-existent one, whose being is the foundation of all reality. It's like a full download of divine reality directly into the purified soul.
And this radical internal reorganization, this death to self and getting the ultimate complete knowledge, is immediately cemented by the change of name. Abram becomes Abraham, Sarai becomes Sarah.
Okay.
This seems to signal that the transformation is now permanent, right?
Absolutely. The name change is a central allegory in the path of abandonment. It signifies that the old identity, which was based on the limited capacity of the flesh, is gone for good.
So it's more than just a new title?
Oh, much more. The source explains that after the person's death to self, God grants a new name, which is known only to the receiver. But more importantly, this new name symbolizes that God simultaneously endows the person with the necessary divine attributes to fulfill the promise that's inherent in that name.
So if you were Abram, exalted father, you were just sort of aspiring to be a great patriarch. But when you become Abraham, father of many nations, it's like God has done the surgery and infused the spiritual DNA that makes that outcome a certainty.
That's the key distinction. You don't just have a new title. You have a new spiritual essence. This new name and the promised king shall come out of you. They guarantee a true and permanent stability. This covenant is eternal because the human will, which is what causes all the instability and backsliding, has been completely absorbed into God's will.
So they've reached a state where they're obeying on earth just as the blessed do in heaven.
And their obedience is natural, not forced. It just flows.
Okay, so we move from that internal state to the outward physical sign, circumcision, the seal of the covenant. God commands that every male must be circumcised. This is where the spiritual rubber really meets the road, isn't it? The physical act represents an intense spiritual requirement.
It really is. And Guyon treats this commandment as the absolute prerequisite for entering her path of abandonment. Spiritual circumcision is the cutting off of everything that gives life in Adam.
Everything.
Everything. This means excising the entire foundation of the old fallen self, especially its attachment to the sensual, the fleshly life.
That word everything is. It's terrifyingly comprehensive. What does everything that gives life in Adam look like in a modern context? Is it just, obvious sins, or is it something more subtle?
Oh, it's far more subtle than just obvious sins. It includes anything that sustains your fleshy animal life.
Which means?
That means relying on sensory indulgence, self-comfort, intellectual pride, or even relying on your own personal efforts for spiritual success. The spiritual path, she says, begins by constantly restraining these carnal desires and abandoning all the things that feed the self. This painful, continuous action is what identifies God's true people in this mystical sense.
And the source makes a really profound point about the universality of this requirement. It applies equally to the born in the house and the bought slave. This seems to address that potential self-justification where someone might think, oh, I've led a good life. I don't need this painful cutting off.
That distinction is absolutely crucial. The person born in the house, they appear externally clean and blameless, right? Maybe they've never indulged in gross sin.
Yeah.
And yet, Guyon insists they must still abandon everything of the Adamic life to make room for Christ's life. The subtle, deep-seated pride of a good moral life is often harder to surrender than the obvious tyranny of sin felt by the bought slave.
Because the slave already knows they need saving.
Exactly. The slave is already groaning under bondage and knows they need salvation, which can make their initial surrender more desperate and therefore, paradoxically, more complete.
And this brings us to the difference in the experience itself. Active versus passive circumcision. How does the intensity of that surrender define the type of spiritual surgery you receive?
This is a beautiful and, I think, defining nuance of the path of abandonment. For those who have not yet reached total surrender, their early stages involve active spiritual discipline. They have to actively restrain their carnal desires. They are, so to speak, holding the knife in their own hand, trying to cut themselves off.
Which sounds fraught with self-will and inconsistency.
It is. But for the completely surrendered, the person who has truly given up their will, the experience shifts dramatically. For them, the circumcision is passive. God personally operates the knife. The individual might mourn and fear and weep because of the pain of the spiritual wound, the loss of what felt natural and self-sustaining.
So that makes sense.
But their human sorrow and resistance don't hinder God's hand because their will is fully submitted. They become passive recipients of divine surgery.
So that implies that true rest and peace are found after the total surrender of the will, even if the spiritual operation that follows is painful. The pain of the surgery is preferable to the uncertainty of operating on yourself.
Absolutely. And the intensity of the surgery is directly proportional to the resistance. The source uses a really vivid metaphor.
Yeah.
The deeper the rooted habit of sensory indulgence, acting like an overgrowth of the foreskin, the stronger the resistance to the knife and the more severe the circumcision will feel. If you have decades of reliance on self-comfort or self-pity, the removal of that foundational structure will feel devastating.
It's a necessary, painful excision.
And it's based on the depth of the self-life being removed.
Which must be why Guyon includes that severe warning against false abandonment. If the experience is supposed to be this radical, this cutting off of everything, then just a mere intellectual nod to the idea isn't enough.
Not even close. She's very clear. Those who claim they are on the path of abandonment but retain their old life, who want to keep all their habitual comforts and pleasures while claiming the name of circumcision, they are excluded from the true number of the abandoned.
True spiritual loss is visible.
It has to be. If you claim radical surrender but nothing has actually changed in your attachments, the spiritual operation was never performed.
Okay, so Abraham has passed through this radical surgery of circumcision. He's received his new, stable identity. Now the scene shifts again, and it starts examining the internal spiritual geography of the person.
That's right.
The source explains that after this mysterious death, the spirit is resurrected, and it renews the center of the soul and the superior part of the soul, which is represented by Abraham.
And the superior part of the soul is the highest aspect of human consciousness. The intellect, the will, the part that's capable of direct communion with God. This part gets the new life first.
But the spiritual life involves the whole person.
Of course. Subsequently, the inferior part of the soul, which is represented by Sarah, is also renewed. This lower part is the sensual, active, and practical part of our being. It's the place where we interact with the material world.
So Sarah, the lower soul, is now made a partner in the promise. She gets her new name. But then when the promise of a son is reiterated, Abraham laughs. And this laughter is a really curious combination of faith and doubt.
It is.
He seems to believe the promise made to himself, but he doubts the promise related to Sarah that they will have a son in their old age.
And this is so critical for understanding advanced spiritual struggle. Abraham, the higher soul, is established in faith, and he fully believes the purely spiritual promises of union. He knows God will be his reward. But he doubts the promise related to the lower material part of the soul, Sarah, the promise of spiritual fruitfulness after reuniting with that lower soul.
Why would the established higher soul doubt the potential of the lower soul? That seems strange.
Because the higher soul knows intimately the weakness, the barrenness, and the, historical inability of the lower soul. It views the practical, sensible, and human part of itself as something outside of God's direct capacity to fully transform and make fruitful.
So it's the spiritual equivalent of saying, yeah, I know God can save my soul, but can he really make me fruitful and useful in this decaying body in this distracting world?
That's a perfect way to put it. The spiritual person trusts God for the abstract, but struggles to trust him for the concrete, embodied reality.
That makes profound sense.
And the interesting spiritual state at this point is that both parts of the soul, the higher and the lower, they both rest in their recognized poverty and their lack of expectation. They are content with being nothing.
So this is a state of quiet rest.
It's the state of quiet rest before the truly apostolic or fruitful phase begins. They aren't striving. They're just waiting in their recognized poverty.
Okay, now we come to the allegory of the children, Isaac and Ishmael. The source makes it crystal clear that Isaac isn't just a historical figure. He's the ultimate spiritual attainment.
He is. Isaac represents Jesus Christ being formed within the person. This is the ultimate supernatural and impossible birth of the divine life in the soul. It's the end result of the path of divine union.
And the conditions for this birth they seem utterly paradoxical and demanding.
They are extreme. The source emphasizes that this birth only occurs when the person has completely despaired of all natural support and has entirely lost interest in supernatural gifts.
A double death.
It's a double death. You have to cease striving for anything that is naturally achievable. And you must also cease striving for spectacular spiritual experiences.
But wait a minute. If someone is on the path of abandonment, wouldn't they still want the supernatural gifts like healing, prophecy, profound spiritual experiences? To entirely lose interest in those seems almost counterintuitive to a spiritual journey.
And that's the final purification of motive.
How so?
If you are still seeking supernatural gifts, you are still subtly seeking something for yourself, a spiritual confirmation, a sign, a feeling of power or importance. The Isaac birth, the formation of Christ within, has to reveal the power to be God's alone, not ours.
So the soul has to be stripped of all ambition.
Even holy ambition. It must be so stripped of ambition that it finds its joy only in God himself, regardless of any accompanying phenomena.
And this absolute poverty is then immediately challenged by Abraham's intercession for Ishmael. Oh, that Ishmael might live before you. This sounds like a final temptation.
It is the subtle, recurring temptation of the established soul. Ishmael represents those practicing what Guyon calls multiplied practices, or the ways of multiplicity.
Okay, what does that mean?
It's the path of intense activity that looks holy on the surface, but is still rooted in subtle self-will.
Can you give us a kind of modern analogy of what multiplied practices look like for the listener?
Sure. Think of it this way. Multiplied practices are when you fill your life with rigorous religious duties, hours of intense prayer, constant evangelism, rigorous self-denial, or filling every quiet moment with spiritual reading.
The things that look really good.
They look great, but you are doing them because you want to achieve or earn God's favor, or because the activity distracts you from the terrifying quietness of pure rest. You're still relying on doing something holy rather than being nothing.
So Abraham is momentarily saying, God, maybe we should just focus on this path of active striving, the Ishmael path, since we're so old and barren anyway.
Exactly. And God's response is so telling. He doesn't condemn Ishmael. He blesses him. He promises he'll have great advantages and become a great nation.
Right.
God acknowledges that this path of multiplied practices will indeed be fruitful, but in a quantifiable, limited way. It produces many people, many good works. It is the path of those not yet detached from the flesh.
Right.
But God makes it explicitly clear that Ishmael is not the path of his true, deep people, whose destiny is unlimited union. The true birth, Isaac, is only allowed when the parents are past all hope and all self-reliance. It's the birth not born of the will of man, but entirely of God.
So the difference between the two paths is the source of the fruit and the nature of the reward.
Precisely. The blessings for Ishmael are limited. 12 princes, a great nation, tangible, measurable things.
Okay.
But the blessings for Isaac, for the path of the abandoned and faithful, are unlimited. And this unlimited reward includes Christ himself as the internal fruit. God himself is the reward of the faithful person, just as he told Abraham earlier, I am your exceedingly great reward.
So the Ishmael path gets a gift from the giver.
And the Isaac path gets union with the giver.
That sets the stage perfectly for chapter 18. We have a soul that is totally stripped. It's in profound poverty, having moved past self-will and the desire for activity. So the question is, what happens when God meets that soul in its state of rest?
And the transition here is crucial. The state that was achieved in Genesis 17 is defined by internal rest and humility. And Genesis 18 opens with Abraham sitting at the tent door in the heat in the valley of Mamre's oaks, where he encounters 3 men.
Why is that setting so significant? I mean, he's just sitting down,
Right.
maybe relaxing in the shade.
The source material sees this setting as the absolute epitome of spiritual preparation. Sitting at the tent door signifies the person's diligent effort to protect their soul and preserve their spiritual inheritance, but they're doing it in the rest of contemplation.
And the physical place, the Valley of Mamre's Oaks.
That's key. Mamre literally means strength or fatness, but allegorically it is defined as the valley of humility and death to self.
Ah, so you have to descend into that valley of self-extinction to achieve the necessary spiritual rest.
Exactly. For God to manifest and appear to us, we have to be settled in that humility. If the soul is still striving on the mountain of self-effort or bustling in the marketplace of multiplied practices, that Ishmael path, it just misses the quiet, intimate appearance of the divine visitors.
You have to be at peace to receive the visitation of peace.
You do.
Yeah.
And Abraham's reaction to seeing the 3 strangers is just extraordinary. He runs to meet them, but he addresses them instantly as one. My Lord, if I have found favor.
Yeah.
This is the profound insight that results from true, sustained union. The person, filled with such deep love for God, believes that everything is God. They're willing to treat every single person, even 3 unknown strangers, as God himself.
So the individual is so spiritually saturated.
That their soul finds God in everything and is unable to speak of any other subject.
But wait, if the abandoned soul sees God in everything, how does Guyon distinguish this from just, generalized religious feeling or even pantheism?
Yeah.
It sounds like the soul is just projecting the divine onto strangers.
That is an excellent and a very necessary question. It's not a philosophical declaration that all things are God in their essence.
Okay.
Rather, it's a statement about the perceiving faculty of the soul. The soul has been so purified and so fully united with God's presence that its internal lens is altered. It looks at creation or at strangers, and it instantly perceives the divine arrangement or potential within them.
So it's not projection, it's intuition.
It's spiritual intuition. The soul's love is so total that it operates as if every single encounter is the Lord's direct presence.
And the next action is this staggering burst of energy. Abraham is sitting in quiet contemplation, but when he sees the Lord, he becomes a whirlwind of activity.
It does.
He commands Sarah to prepare fine flour. He runs to get a tender calf. He personally serves them. How do we reconcile that intense, quick action of running and serving with the prerequisite of being in the rest of contemplation? This seems like a contradiction for a modern, busy person.
And this is the beautiful paradox that defines the fully sanctified life in Guyon's teaching. The source notes that those worthy of being touched by God's love in the passive way of contemplation, those internally resting in Mamre, they show absolutely no difficulty when it comes to necessary external actions concerning God's glory.
So the rest isn't laziness, it's actually the source of perfect energy.
Precisely. They act quickly in everything, running, commanding, serving. Yet they remain continuously at rest internally. Their soul is like a deep well. The surface might be rushing with activity. The bucket's going up and down, the water is spilling.
Right.
But the water at the bottom remains perfectly still, rooted in God. Their actions flow effortlessly from their internal peace, rather than from their human, self-striving will.
So if my activity is self-generated, it drains me and takes me out of rest. But if my activity is God-generated, flowing from the rest, it's effortless, it's swift, and it doesn't compromise my internal stability.
You've just synthesized the concept perfectly. The internal state of rest is so profound that it fuels external generosity and openness, which are stated to be equal to the degree of their love for God. Their devotion is lavish and immediate. It's devoid of the hesitation caused by self-interest or, calculating whether the effort is worth it.
They just act because love compels them.
They just act, which makes the reference to Mary Magdalene at Simon the leper's house so clear. That lavish act of devotion was criticized by the calculating people around her, but it came from a place of utter internal stillness and profound love, which ignored all external opinion.
It's the perfect parallel. When the self is abandoned, the soul's activity is measured not by human economy, but by divine generosity. The speed of Abraham's action running to get the calf demonstrates the immediate responsiveness of the abandoned soul to the divine request, no matter how taxing the task. Then the divine visitors affirm the promise: a son next year. Sarah, listening from the tent door, laughs internally. She says, "After I am worn out, shall I have pleasure, my master being old also." The promise is reaffirmed, yet doubt immediately arises.
And this highlights the lingering imperfection in the inferior part of the soul, in Sarah. God rewards their generous act of hospitality with the firm assurance of the promise.
Right.
But because Sarah, the lower sensory soul, is not yet firmly established in God, doubt and unbelief arise. The lower part of the soul is rational, and it looks at its own weakness, its physical decay, and its husband's age, and it views the matter entirely from a human standpoint.
It's the tension between the logic of the body and the certainty of the spirit. The higher soul, Abraham, hears the promise and accepts it, but the lower soul, Sarah, immediately calculates the biological impossibility.
That is precisely the spiritual struggle. The rational faculty interferes with faith by calculating human limitations, and the divine question that follows is the essential lesson. God confronts Abraham, and by extension, the higher soul of the listener. Why did Sarah laugh, saying, "Shall I surely bear a child since I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord?"
That rhetorical question should silence all rational doubt. But why does God wait until after they are past all hope to deliver on the promise? It seems cruel.
This is where, in Guyon's view, God delights in exercising faith and abandonment. He gives the desired object only when hope for it has completely ceased.
And why?
To show that the power is entirely his, and to prevent the person from taking any credit, even subconsciously. For the truly established person like Abraham, they no longer doubt. Paul praises him for hoping against hope. He looks only at God. But the person still tethered to self, like Sarah, looks only at their own lack.
And the final part of this exchange is so critical when Sarah is confronted. She denies laughing out of fear. "I did not laugh," and the Lord insists, "No, but you did laugh." This momentary lie in denial is highly significant in Guyon's allegorical analysis.
It is. The source identifies two profound errors here that are common spiritual traps. First, the lie itself, that initial cowardly reaction of denial when you're confronted with a spiritual failing.
And the second?
Second, and far more dangerous, is the attempt to justify herself. By denying the laughter, she implicitly attempts to shift the blame to God, suggesting that if she hadn't laughed, God was somehow mistaken or lying.
Wow. That is the ultimate act of self-preservation, protecting the ego even by accusing the divine.
It is the spiritual cancer that ruins many a seeking soul. This passage serves as a critical allegory for the listener. People who are accustomed to justifying themselves, they just accumulate faults upon faults. They cannot admit a mistake.
They're always looking for reasons.
Constantly trying to find reasons for their spiritual shortcomings, often shifting the blame onto God, complaining he is cruel or has abandoned them or that circumstances are rigged against them.
So the truly abandoned soul has to accept every conviction of the Spirit, no matter how painful it is, without trying to mitigate or explain away their failure.
Exactly. The faithful soul remains completely unwavering in God's arrangements, trusting his goodness and justice implicitly, even when feeling vulnerable or afraid or convicted. This loyalty and pure faith attract great grace, whereas Sarah's denial leads to a sharp divine rebuke.
It highlights that ongoing war between operating from self-preservation and operating from pure, naked faith. The mood shifts again after Sarah's confrontation. God turns to his own internal dialogue and states, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing?" This is a revelation of the supreme intimacy achieved through perfected abandonment.
This intimacy is the ultimate, unlimited reward of the transformation process that was completed in chapter 17. God cannot conceal anything from those who are firmly established in naked faith and rest in him.
Naked faith.
Naked faith, in Guyon's terms, means faith stripped of all signs, all intellectual supports, all emotional feelings, and all self-interest. To these people, God reveals his most secret counsel. They are privy to his divine mind.
That suggests a direct, instantaneous spiritual knowing. If they know God's mind, how does this manifest practically for the person? How do they perceive the world around them without relying on rational data?
Because they possess the Spirit of God, they move from mere rational knowledge to profound spiritual sensing. They can immediately discern the state of others, even the most hidden secrets of their conscience. And this is described using this incredible mystical language.
Which is?
They sense the state of things through a mysterious aroma and a divine taste.
A divine taste that bypasses logic entirely. Can you elaborate on what that spiritual intuition feels like? I mean, how can we bridge this mystical language to something relatable for the listener?
Okay, think of it as an immediate synthesis of truth. When you taste a complex dish, You don't rationally analyze the salt, the pepper, the acidity sequentially, right? You taste the whole experience instantly, and you know if it is good or bad.
Right. It's just an immediate knowing.
Similarly, the abandoned soul, having their senses purified, looks at a person or a situation and instantaneously tastes its moral and spiritual essence, whether it aligns with God's will or not. There is no need for external confirmation or deduction. The truth is immediately imprinted on the soul by this kind of mysterious aroma or divine intuition. This allows them to function in the world with perfect discernment.
Wow. Okay, so following this revelation, the scene focuses on intercession. 2 angels go toward Sodom. The third, who represents God, remains with Abraham. And Abraham speaks to the third as if he is speaking directly to God.
And this sets the stage for the prayer for Sodom, which demonstrates the power of the abandoned soul.
This passage really shows the role of God's friends as effective advocates, placing themselves between divine justice and human wickedness. They intercede even for God's enemies.
And their method is so profound. Abraham doesn't rely on his personal merit at all. He relies purely on God's own nature. He appeals to God's inherent justice.
He confronts the Almighty.
He does, with a rhetorical challenge that is, paradoxically, the deepest act of worship. He reminds God that he never destroys the innocent with the guilty. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? This is spiritual advocacy founded on total trust in God's perfect character.
And crucially, Abraham begins his plea by recognizing his own nothingness. I am but dust and ashes. He pleads from 50 righteous down to 10.
And this confession of utter humility and death to self is the very foundation of his effective prayer. It's not Abraham's power or his spiritual standing that gives his plea weight. It's his profound recognition of his own nothingness that empowers his intercession for others.
So there's a critical observation here for the community.
Yes. Righteous people are few among the multitude of sinners, but their presence, even just 10 people, can save an entire city. This just underscores the disproportionate spiritual value of the truly abandoned soul.
So the implication is that a few people who have truly achieved union and rest in God are worth more to the world than millions engaged in that Ishmael-like path of multiplied practices.
Precisely. The power of the abandoned soul is not in its volume of activity, but in its quality of union, which allows it to move God's will through prayer.
But we have to address the ending of the prayer. Abraham stops at 10. Why not 5? Why not 1? This seems to reveal a crucial boundary to intercession, even for God's closest friends.
It does.
We just established that God can't refuse a request from his best friends who pray only for his glory. So what limits the prayer?
The limitation lies in the free will of the stubborn sinner. The source explains that God also cannot give what stubborn sinners prevent him from giving, namely, repentance. Because some sinners, through their hard-heartedness, are determined not to repent, God does not allow his friends to request things that would fundamentally violate his just will and the established moral order regarding human choice.
So the prayer stops not because Abraham runs out of faith, but because he recognizes the just boundaries of God's nature concerning human wickedness and free will.
Correct. Abraham, honoring God's infinite goodness and recognizing that asking for less than 10 might violate divine justice. He does not dare to ask further. He trusts completely in God's goodness and justice for the outcome.
And this leads to the ultimate definition of perfected prayer, praying only for God's interest. It's the final purification of motive.
It is. The person who has achieved permanent stability in God prays only according to God's movement and will, and only for God's interests, forgetting all self-interest. This is why Abraham forgets his own interests, even concerning his own kin, Lot, who is in Sodom. He doesn't ask about his nephew's fate specifically.
So he's so completely surrendered.
That he trusts God's justice and goodness will manage the outcome for everyone, including his family. Everything has become integrated and unified in God for him. He doesn't see Lot's safety as a separate selfish interest.
That's the essential synthesis.
Right.
Having surrendered everything of the flesh and blood, the Ishmael life, the Sarah doubt, he relies solely on the goodness of God for all outcomes. And the final line of the chapter, the Lord departed and Abraham returned to his own place.
And this defines the consistency and the permanence of the state of abandonment. His own place is his state of rest in God. It is the valley of Mamre, the valley of humility. It's where he was when the 3 visitors first appeared, and it's where he remains after the profound intimacy and the effective intercession. The union and rest achieved through death to self are now permanent and unshakable.
Okay, let's unpack this incredible journey that Madame Guyon has mapped out for us. We saw Abram become Abraham through a definitive internal death to self.
a radical death.
which required the spiritual cutting off of the entire Adam life through spiritual circumcision, the painful abandonment of everything that sustained that fleshy animal existence.
And we learned that the ultimate fruit, Isaac or Christ formed within, can only be born when we are stripped of all human hope and all desire for even supernatural gifts. This required explicitly rejecting reliance on multiplied practices, that busy striving path of Ishmael understanding that religious activity without utter poverty of spirit is just insufficient for true unlimited union.
And I think the most fascinating synthesis came in chapter 18. That stunning paradox, that intense, swift, loving activity running, serving the feast, advocating for Sodom, is possible only when the soul is completely settled in the rest of humility in the Valley of Mamre.
Yeah.
True spiritual stability means abandoning self-justification, resting in pure, naked faith, and viewing the entire world through the lens of God's immediate presence.
And the crowning achievement of this path is that profound intimacy where God can hide nothing from you, granting you that immediate spiritual sensing, that instantaneous discernment we call the divine taste.
Mm-hmm.
And this union empowers the soul to advocate effectively, not based on its own merit, but on the perfect justice of God.
So if the ultimate result of perfect faith is that God can hide nothing from you, and you can instantly discern reality through that mysterious divine taste, what practical step can you take today to move away from a place of multiplied practices, that busy Ishmael-like striving, and commit to a simple, internal, quiet rest, thereby allowing God to truly disclose his secrets and act purely through your life?
That's your deep dive homework.